We should be live.
And we live today. We embarrassing layman with his brilliant TikTok dances and his brilliant TikTok. Guess what are you putting on TikTok? Consciousness, hard problem of consciousness TikTok, showing all the atheists how it's done. Welcome, please, Emerson Green. Wow! Oh my god! Oh my god! The guy from TikTok. Is that the guy who does TikTok? Yes, Emerson
Hey,
from
thanks for
TikTok.
having me, man.
You are welcome.
TikTok is the most important thing in my life right now. Like I'm dropping all of the only thing I care about is TikTok now. Just the best humor in the world, not at all cringe-inducing, just fun dances. You know, not all stuff that makes you think that maybe the anti-natalists were right. Just really cool. I'm dedicating my life to TikTok now.
Have you actually started, like, I know you got on TikToks and put a few videos, but have you actually started watching it a little? Because it is surprisingly addicting.
Oh no, I barely watch anything on there. It's just a cringe fest. It's really, really bad. I actually hate TikTok.
You hate what?
I hate TikTok. Am I coming through all right?
Yeah, I cut out a little bit because over the summer, when I think the coronavirus first started, I got on and I started getting addicted to watching it. For a while, I was addicted. Like I figured 15-second videos, you can't be interested at all. And then somehow like 3 or 4 hours will go by and you're like, where on earth did that time go? So
yeah, I can't say that's ever happened to me.
Well, you're new to TikTok yet. How long have you been checking it out for? Just like a month or so?
Like a week or two.
Oh, okay. Give it time. It'll get inside of you. Pretty soon you'll be like doing TikTok trends and knowing what the trends are, knowing what the music trends are. It's really insidious. I swear to God, 4 hours can go by and you're like, oh my God. Was I just on TikTok for 4 straight hours? And then once you start to get bored of it, though, you start to get bored of it. Like I haven't picked it up in a while. So it's one of those things like Facebook. When you first get on Facebook, after a while, you're into it for an extended period of time, and then you're like,
I don't know. Twitter is just a thing that takes up like all my time. Like I get on Twitter and then I get off Twitter and then it's like, what do I do now? And then I just get straight back on Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, Twitter. If you're not paying attention, 3 or 4 hours can go by, and you've only gone like 10 tweets into a conversation. Like, how on earth did that happen? So that could definitely happen too. So what is your deal? You're an atheist and you have a YouTube channel and you're on Twitter. How long have you been on here for, and what's your thing?
Well, I started a podcast a couple of years ago. It's called Counter Apologetics, and it just kind of does what it says in the title there. And I only started uploading on YouTube. I just started like mirroring podcast episodes, like maybe a year or two ago.
Emerson? Sorry, just to cut in. There's a setting in Zoom. If you go to your video settings, if you maybe lower your video quality, I think that should help because there's a little bit of roboting that's going on. I think.
Why don't I just do this?
Okay. That works too, I guess.
Okay.
Going back to our roots. Audio only podcast. Here we go.
We were selling a lot based on your looks, though. I mean, that was a big part of the draw. So.
Oh yeah, thanks for that screenshot. By the way, just the worst possible picture you could find of me, I think, is the one that you chose for the.
Is that what John does? That he got notes from one of them said too. She was like, "Can you use a different screenshot?" I was like. Halfway, I forget what she was doing. She was like in between saying something, and I don't know what he does. He's the best there is, though.
He's the sniper.
So you started a podcast. I listened to you were on some interview where you're talking about you started out as a Christian once upon a time, right? In your background.
Oh yeah, yep. I was. I mean, ministry is kind of the family business. Like my grandpa's a pastor, my uncle's a pastor, my parents have been in and out of like full-time and part-time ministry my whole life, and I was a worship leader. So yeah, I was very much a Christian. Then I went to an apologetics camp, I guess, when I was 18 or 19. 19, I guess. And then that was around the time I started calling myself an atheist.
At the apologetics boot camp is where you deconverted. Was it like one of those like what's that one that's on Netflix that everyone talks about?
Jesus Camp?
Yeah, was it something like that?
No. It was like apologetics. It wasn't like charismatic stuff. But the thing is, I actually do come from a background that is a little bit like Jesus Camp.
Right. So it was fairly somewhere in between hardcore fundamentalist and very fundamentalist. Was that what you would say?
Well, I mean, that's my background, but that apologetics camp was just like, what was it, like 70 or 80 hours of lectures in like a 2-week period about like, philosophy of religion and apologetics and stuff. And like, I had never been exposed to anything like that. And I just was like in love with it immediately. But I also realized that I didn't believe in God.
Wow. So that's honestly where you started deconverting, in that camp?
Well, I had already been doubting for a long time, like it doesn't just happen. Like, it was a gradual change, doubting things like, like divine hiddenness has actually always been an issue for me, even though I wouldn't have put it that way. Like just sort of normal doubts about, prayer or religious epistemology. And then I was kind of sent to this camp because I was starting to express those doubts. And that's where I learned a lot of, I was exposed for the first time to a lot of arguments for God, and given kind of straw man versions of their counter arguments. But even so, I was just kind of, apologetics, like it just wasn't very impressive to me. Like I was just like, this is it. Like I kind of thought that I would come here.
Funny,
and then
when I first got on Twitter, I felt the same way. Like I was so excited to hear, because the apologetics and counter apologetics, like out there in the real world, I barely knew that they even existed. So when I got on Twitter like 4 or 5 years ago, and I didn't even really know who William Lane Craig was. And I was so like stoked. I was like, cool, there's actually going to be arguments here. And then when I heard the arguments, like, wait a minute, these kind of, are you kidding? Like, I was like, wait a minute, the Kalam, are you sure this is it? Like,
very disappointing.
That's exactly how I felt, but as a Christian, because I thought I was.
I barely took apologetics seriously, like even when I was a Christian. Like,
have a whole bunch.
Oh, sorry. You keep cutting out for a second, so I'll like jump in. But I hope I'm not interrupting you.
No, you're not. Don't worry about interrupting me, because we can err on the side of me talking less. That's fine.
Apologetics, it just, I don't know. Because I went to this camp, I genuinely, sincerely believed that I was going to have like a come to Jesus moment and be like, oh my God, this is going to be part of my testimony. Like I was an atheist and then I like deconverted. And then it was like the last night of the camp and I was like, wait, I haven't had any of my questions answered, and I haven't exactly been bowled over by the quality of these arguments. And I was just kind of disappointed. And not a lot of atheists have like a struck by lightning kind of moment where it's like, oh, I'm an atheist. But I definitely had one of those. And it was weird because I had already been calling myself an atheist, but there was this moment where it was like, where I suddenly became aware that like I actually don't believe anymore. And it was it was psychologically destabilizing because I took it really seriously. But I fully expected some wise Christian to just answer all my objections, and then just it would just be a part of my testimony someday.
Yeah, I could definitely see going into it with that type of expectation. And probably your doubts got worse because that expectation was disappointed. That's kind of what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Now, so God, this is hard because you cut out every once in a while, so it's hard to like. So what got you started on panpsychism? How did you get into like the little? You kind of have a niche, if I'm understanding correctly. You focused on like philosophy of mind and philosophy of religion. Is that more or less right?
Yep. Those are my two central interests. Well, I got into panpsychism because I I basically just made a couple episodes for counter apologetics about just like about consciousness, because that comes up, when you argue about God. So I, had been like reading about it and writing about it. And in the course of researching, I came across this essay by Thomas Nagel called Panpsychism. And it's in his book called Mortal Questions, which is a very good book. I highly recommend it. And, like I read the first few pages and I was really intrigued. I mean, I thought it was like absolutely crazy, and I couldn't really understand how like an otherwise intelligent adult would believe something like this. But it did bother me though, because I was like, I can't see what's wrong with this. Like I was reading it and I was just like, this doesn't, I mean, it's counterintuitive, but I can't really see why this is actually incorrect. And, so that was where I first came across it. But ultimately, I ended up rejecting physicalism first, like before I ended up on this kind of more radical solution.
Right. So before we get into panpsychism, what started the rejection of physicalism? And there are a few. Thomas Nagel's probably the most famous.
You cut out, Craig. I think he was just going to ask who else
on Twitter, and you.
Uh-oh.
Did I cut out?
Yeah, you did. You had just mentioned Tom Nagel is sort of a famous anti-physicalist atheist, right?
Yeah, and who else? There's Tom Nagel, David Chalmers.
Oh yeah, there are lots. There's Thomas Nagel, David Chalmers, Noam Chomsky, Philip Goff, Galen Strawson, and then like if you go back in history a little bit, you have like Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Bertrand Russell. These are all famous atheists who are anti-physicalists. People often conflate physicalism and atheism, and that's just a complete mistake.
So how did you come to the anti-physicalist part first? That happened before you became a panpsychist, right? So what started occurring to you?
Well, I mean, it started with the hard problem, I guess, because the task, as I see it, is to explain phenomenal consciousness. And, everyone's heard of the hard problem, and it's like, I just kind of thought like everyone else, like, oh, it's probably not a problem, fluidity emerges, tables emerge, like all these things emerge, and there's not really a mystery about it, like biology emerges from chemistry. So there are all these like weakly emergent phenomena, and, we have like, we sort of have a precedent, where it's like, look, consciousness is probably just like all these other things. That's what I thought. That's what pretty much everyone else thinks, where it's like, look, we get A from not A all the time. We get fluidity from things that aren't fluid. We get tables and chairs from things that aren't tables and chairs. Why should consciousness be any different? And, that was my position. But starting to reject physicalism came down to realizing that those are not good analogies for the emergence of consciousness. So there actually is something different going on here, because anyone can just appeal to these, unrelated examples of successful reduction and say, yeah, consciousness is just like that. That's right. Easy to do. What's harder to do is to actually sketch out a positive, intelligible account of how you're supposed to go from the objective to the subjective, like about how you're supposed to get from the non-experiential to the experiential without appealing to strong emergence, or without just eliminating phenomenal consciousness altogether. And the thing is, once you accept strong emergence, you're not a physicalist anymore. You're better described as a dualist. And if you eliminate phenomenal consciousness, then you've eliminated phenomenal consciousness, and that's pretty dumb. Don't do that. So physicalism can't explain phenomenal consciousness, and I can go into why I think that if you want.
Well, you said you had a 7.5 minute like introduction to panpsychism. But one of the things you said, which I thought was really clear, is consciousness is unobservable. And then you can observe all the brain states, but you can't observe what it is like to be experiencing. I think that's how you phrased it.
Yeah. Consciousness is not like other things for a few reasons, but yeah, that's one of them. It's a concretely real natural phenomenon that we know exists, but you can't observe it from a third person perspective. Like all I can see is behavior. I can look at your brain, I can look at your behavior, but I can't actually see your experience.
You can't actually measure it, because in that sense, it is immaterial in the strictest sense of the word, right? That's how I would see that. How would you describe that?
I think that's sort of an unjustified leap. Like you'd have to, like, yes, it's unobservable, but that doesn't mean it's immaterial, is what I would say.
Right, but I don't mean supernatural. I just mean not, there is no material that you can observe from it. So it's not like consciousness can produce consciousness. How would you, what's the simplest way that you would describe the hard problem of consciousness? What do you think it is, and what's the easiest way you would describe it? Let's start there.
Well, if you start at sort of, let's just pick subatomic particles to start off at. You put subatomic particles together and you get atoms. So when you go from protons, neutrons, and electrons to atoms, you haven't added to the, ontological inventory of the universe. You've just you found a different way of talking about the same stuff that's always been there. So like we go from subatomic particles to atoms, we go from atoms to molecules, molecules up to these like kind of microorganisms, into bigger and bigger, more complex organisms. And all the while, nothing new is being added. It's the same stuff that's always been there, just arranged differently. We find different ways of talking about it. But at some point, it becomes like something to be for these physical systems. So consciousness, is this concretely existing natural phenomenon. So what you have is you're just moving up this scale, and it's just this smooth gradient of gradual change, And then at some point, there's just this radical leap in nature. And that's basically how I see the hard problem, is like we have this thing, phenomenal consciousness or experience that just is not really susceptible to this smooth gradient. It's not really like biology emerging from chemistry or fluidity emerging from molecules, because there we have this intelligible story about how to get from one to the other, and it doesn't require any giant leap. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. You cut out a little on the back part. Do you follow Chalmers at all? Do you watch him? Do you listen to his lectures and stuff?
Yeah, I'm a fan.
Okay. How is he describing it? Is it very similar to what you said?
Yeah, it's like we have these brain states, because you can put together this like weakly emergent, story all the way from subatomic particles to brains, and there's no giant leap, right? Like so, but then there's the what it's like of experience. There all of it, like why should it be like something to be a brain state? So I think that's more how he would phrase it, is just like, okay, we can use neuroscience to study the brain, we can learn all kinds of things about how the brain works, but we can never really answer why it should be like something to be one of these like neural states.
Now, do you know who Patricia Childers
Patricia
is?
Churchland?
Churchland, yeah.
Yeah, I'm familiar.
Okay. Because she's like an eliminationist. And what exactly is an eliminationist versus what you're talking about? And explain why you think that a strict physicalist is not possible, if those two questions make sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, okay, so there's eliminativism, and that's just, in philosophy of mind, that's when you're eliminating things from what they like to call folk psychology, somewhat dismissively. But there's a specific kind of eliminativist that I have a big problem with. Sometimes they're called illusionists, and they try to say that phenomenal consciousness is an illusion.
Right.
In the same way
Isn't Daniel Dennett is pretty famous for that, right?
Yep, Dan Dennett, Keith
But I've
Frank
actually never heard the real argument behind it. Go ahead.
Well, the argument behind it is sort of similar to what I'm saying here, where it's like, look, phenomenal consciousness is irreducible, and it is like not really explainable in material terms. So
Right.
It doesn't exist, because we know that materialism is true. We know that physicalism is true. And
right.
If qualia are real and irreducible, then that means physicalism is false. So we need to, because qualia are irreducible, that's sort of how we know that they don't exist. Like that's giving like a very summary account, but the point is they eliminate phenomenal.
That kind of makes sense, because she was talking when she was on Aaron Ra's show, she starts talking about there is spooky stuff. And what she means by spooky stuff is basically another way of saying what you're saying is that it's irreducible, and there are certain aspects of consciousness that, in real technical terms, you're saying don't exist, means they can't really be accounted for given the material world. Is that another way of saying it?
Yeah,
I'm trying to
yeah,
say
like
this in simple terms, because I've noticed that a lot of people don't really understand what these debates are about. So I'm trying to, and it's not helped by the fact that the audio keeps cutting out. So it's hard to, this
yeah,
is
yeah.
really complicated stuff, but I'm trying to make it, simplify it so that people understand what we're talking about.
Is it hard to understand me? Am I cutting out too much or
No,
what?
you're cutting out now, but when you cut out, it becomes really hard because you're talking about really complicated things, and all of a sudden you disappear for like, I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah. Just to let you know, Craig, I think it's all on your side. So it like we're still able to hear Emerson as he's talking. So if he does say something like especially profound, you can just watch it back over again if you need to.
Yeah, well, he's saying profound stuff, but it's really hard to, like, when, you know, talk about the irreducibility of consciousness, and like part of it cuts out and you hear like consciousness and you're like, huh? But go ahead.
Right. So, I mean, I don't want to go too much
What
into
I'm trying to do is get you to, what?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
What I'm trying to get you to do is simplify where you're at, starting with the physicalist position, how you got there, and then we're going to simply explain panpsychism and why you think it solves to some degree. Because that's why you became a panpsychist, right?
Right. So yeah, physicalism can't explain phenomenal consciousness, and illusionists agree. That's why they get rid of phenomenal consciousness, because they're more
certain
it's an
illusion.
Right. They're more certain that physicalism is true than they are that they're conscious, which is profoundly stupid. But yeah, but they have ways of getting around it, and I shouldn't be too dismissive. It is actually more interesting than you would think at first glance, because of course it seems like it's wrong because it contradicts a datum, you know, that you're conscious. But it is a little more interesting. You know, like David Chalmers actually gives it like 10% credence. David Chalmers like splits up his credences in a way that's kind of interesting, where he's like 30% panpsychism, 30% naturalistic dualism, 10% illusionism, and 30% he's like, I just try to like keep a blank space there intentionally, because maybe there's something I haven't thought of, and I want to keep an open mind.
Let me ask you a side question. Why is David Chalmers so known in this field? Did he just popularize this phrase, the hard problem of consciousness, and he's just good at lecturing and he's good at explaining it? Or is there some other reason why he tends to be the name that everyone goes to?
He's an excellent communicator, but yeah, he coined the hard problem. He's not the first person to point out the hard problem. But yeah, he coined the term the hard problem and got people to pay attention to it. He has written quite a few really interesting papers in philosophy of mind. And he also is behind the Phil Papers survey. He's the one who organizes that.
I don't know what that is. What is that?
Oh, it's just like it like basically just polls a bunch of philosophers about what they think. So you can see like how many philosophers are determinists, like how many are physicalists.
And very interesting. Where people leaning probably makes a difference if they're atheists or Christians, right?
In terms of physicalism, you mean?
Well, physicalism, yeah. I mean, I think there is such a thing as a Christian physicalist, but I haven't listened to how they consider that possible. There is. Braxton Hunter had a video on it, but I didn't listen to the video yet.
Yeah, Peter Van Inwagen is a physicalist, a Christian physicalist. But the majority opinion right now among philosophers is physicalism. I can't remember the exact percentage, but
okay.
Yeah.
And so go ahead.
Well, I'm just thinking about you know, so I ended up rejecting physicalism because I became convinced that the hard problem really was a hard problem.
Is a real problem. Yes.
Yeah, and so the big problem, as far as I see it, is sort of two things. First is that we can't really get an intelligible account of how to transition from objective description, you know, third person material description, to a first person subjective description. That just seems like you're never going to stack up enough objective descriptions and just it'll smoothly change into like a first person subjective description. That seems sort of like, hey, let's stack up enough abstract objects and eventually we'll get a concrete object. Like it just seems like a category error.
That's even like Sam Harris has a video, like a little snippet video out where he's like, even if we agree that it's an emergent property of the brain, it seems like all we're doing is saying it is in some, by definition, miraculous in some way that we can't account for. Yeah, it may have emerged out of the brain, but that doesn't solve that. There's a leap there somewhere where something emerges that we have no explanation for. That's one way of saying it, right?
Right. Yeah, it would have to be like strong emergence. But the other main point, and this one maybe is a little more vivid, I guess, where it's like, so this is what I call phenomenal precision. And this can sort of illustrate why I think the hard problem is actually a hard problem. So, we know that phenomenal consciousness is real. And the thing is, it's not vague whether or not phenomenal consciousness is present. So what I mean by that is that there's an exact moment when it becomes like something to be for a physical system or a biological system. So there's not like a borderline case of phenomenal consciousness.
Right.
It's either like something to be,
wait,
or
let me make sure I got you right. So there's consciousness, and then there's not consciousness, and there's no like almost consciousness in between state. It's like, is that what you mean?
Yeah. Like it's either like something to be or it's not like something to be.
Right.
So okay, does that make sense?
So it can't come in gradations, in other words. It can't emerge in any meaningful sense of the term emerge. Like it can't, like, you're going up a hill and then all of a sudden there's consciousness. It's like a totally different thing, right?
Yeah. It's not at all like the other examples that people point to, where you do have this like slope, where you have this like smooth gradient, and you have, but with consciousness, it's like, it's just not there. It's just not even blackness. And then all of a sudden the lights are on, however faintly. But the point is, there are no, borderline cases. It's not vague. It's either there or it's not. So that's what I mean when I say phenomenal precision, right? It's like, it's precise whether or not consciousness is present. So,
right.
So that the reason that's a problem, as I've been saying, is that it means that it can't have, excuse me, it couldn't have emerged in the same way that all this other stuff emerged. So because it would require this giant leap that's basically unintelligible, it would be an instance of strong emergence. So the thing is, like, I've been calling it phenomenal precision, because it's precise whether or not it's there. But the thing is, it's just a rephrasing of irreducibility. Like, what I'm showing here is that consciousness is, or at least phenomenal consciousness, experience, this one part that I'm interested in, is irreducible.
Right.
So, but if you say, oh, experience is irreducible, then physicalists will just stop listening to you and say, no, it's just like liquidity or something. And like, so what I'm trying to get them to show is that, like, there is no in-between state between, or sorry, there's no state in between non-experiential reality and experiential reality. Like, if it's kind of like something, then it's like something. If it's sort of like something, then it's like something. If it's just barely like something, then it's like something. Phenomenal consciousness is present, and there are no degrees of consciousness when it comes to experience. So,
right. You mean basically the same thing that I mean by immaterial. I'm a layperson, so I don't know if I'm ever using terms that fit in terms of like, but what I mean by immaterial is that there's a leap there between things that you can account for by, material cause.
We lost you, Craig. You were just saying that
the chemistries.
Yeah.
What's that?
We lost you. You were saying that there's a leap there between what we can account for using like the physical world, right? I think, or something.
Right.
Like that.
And then what he's calling, the how we experience something.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So
and I'm using immaterial. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but every time I use the word, atheists hear supernatural and go, it's not supernatural. I didn't say supernatural. So I understand what you're coming from. So all I was saying with that little aside. Go ahead.
Well, the reason I wouldn't say immaterial is because it sort of presupposes dualism. And like, the philosophy of mind discourse is not a two-party system between materialism and dualism. So I don't want people to think that if you acknowledge that what I'm saying makes sense, which it does, then, oh, now you have to be a dualist, because lots of people don't want to be dualists, myself included. I know that you're a dualist, but I'm saying that, like, there are ways you can reject physicalism and remain a monist.
Okay, so we'll get into that in a second. First, tell us what a property dualist is as opposed to a substance dualist. You know the difference, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, sure. So there's sort of stronger and weaker forms of dualism, and like a substance dualist would be, the more hardcore form where you've got like this immaterial soul that's like
Me, J.P. Moreland, Eric
yeah,
Hernandez, John Buck, the Christians.
it tends to be
And
associated with Christianity. Yeah.
right. The property dualist, because I don't fully understand what a property dualist is and how people think that's coherent. So I was hoping you could explain it.
Yeah, I've never really been all that attracted to property dualism. It's like it's really close to physicalism, and then there are just these non-physical properties that are kind of along for the ride in a way. And the problem is, like, most forms of property dualism are going to terminate in epiphenomenalism. So like property dualism, sorry, I don't want to get ahead of myself. Property dualism is just like a weaker form of dualism where you've just got nothing but the material stuff, but it has these immaterial properties. That's where phenomenal consciousness resides.
It's a way of trying to circle the square. It's like you're not committing to substance dualism, which says there's a totally immaterial thing, and you're trying to tether it to naturalism, but you're still recognizing it's kind of what you're doing with panpsychism, trying to circle the square. But I'm assuming you think panpsychism is more,
well,
when we get to that, is a better way of circling the square, so to speak.
It's definitely better because property dualists are still stuck with strong emergence. They haven't solved the hard problem at all. They haven't even begun to solve. They're still stuck with the same problem. It's like, okay, so brain states have these immaterial properties. Great. I mean, how did that happen? It's still strong emergence. It's still a totally unintelligible form of basically magic where you just, out of nothing, you just pull a rabbit out of a hat, basically. So it's like, I'm not ever going to go for property dualism because...
So in other words, they didn't solve the problem.
Not really, no. But the thing is, sorry, most forms of property dualism also terminate in epiphenomenalism. Like the property dualism has all these issues, so they'll retreat to which where these phenomenal properties of the brain have no causal effects. So like mental causation is maybe a convenient way of talking, but it's not actually. It doesn't reflect reality, and there are a bunch of problems with epiphenomenalism. So it's like, there are problems with property dualism. You're still stuck with strong emergence. And by the way, property dualism is not that different from substance dualism. It really isn't. So it's like you're still stuck with most of the problems of dualism if you're a property dualist. And then they kind of retreat into this weaker epiphenomenalist position. And then you've got a whole new set of problems. And it's like, it's just a total dead end. Like property dualism is a dead end as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. So now, as far as you're concerned, in this video, have we covered what the hard problem of consciousness is, and we've covered why physicalism? Have you talked enough about why you think strict physicalism doesn't work, or do you want to say more about that?
I'm sure a physicalist wouldn't be happy, but I've basically explained a little bit why I think physicalism can't explain phenomenal consciousness because of phenomenal precision, which basically establishes that phenomenal consciousness is irreducible and real. And once you admit that consciousness is irreducible and real, then it's over for physicalism.
Okay, fair enough. Now, I'm assuming you became a panpsychist because you think that it reconciles and solves the problem to some degree. Do you think it totally solves it, or just to some degree?
No, it totally solves the hard problem for sure.
Okay, so tell us what a panpsychist is.
Hold on, I do have a question just for our audience. Can you, you've mentioned the term a couple times, can you sort of explain a little bit more what epiphenomenalism is?
Yeah, I was going to ask that too, actually.
Yeah, because that's like, it seems like it's in agreement, at least with your position, that consciousness isn't like able to be reducible to like objective properties of like atoms and things like that. But it does still seem to be like trying to be saying, no, the only things that, it's like trying to, it's definitely not going to admit that there are these certain like immaterial substances that exist. So can you sort of elaborate on that?
Yeah, so epiphenomenalism is just the view that, phenomenal properties, which is how they would put it, have no physical effects. So there's the neural events that come first, and then there's the experiential events. But there's no such thing as mental causation, so your experiences don't really have anything to do with your behavior. Like they're just kind of along for the ride, but they don't have any causal effects. So what that means is like your experience of hunger has literally nothing to do with you going and getting food. Like your experience of pain has nothing to do with you, you know, recoiling from a negative stimuli. Like, you know, you don't do anything because it feels good. Like the pleasant feeling is just an epiphenomenon. It doesn't cause you to do anything. So I basically take mental causation as a datum. Like it's something that needs to be explained. It's not something that like you can just get rid of. But I do have like arguments against epiphenomenalism. But you follow in like what the view is though.
I
Yeah.
think I got it. John, did you get it? Like, am I out?
I can hear you.
I think I got it.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So, I mean, the reason that's wrong, one really quick reason, is that we're talking about phenomenal consciousness right now, and it's not supposed to have any physical effects. But, you know, I'm here flapping my gums talking about phenomenal consciousness, you know, so it clearly is causing something. I mean, I can make, if that's too quick for you, I could make other arguments like, you know, we have things like the placebo effect, which seems to show that, you know, mental states do have an effect on physical states sometimes.
Right. Well, the one of the examples I used is like you can eat, your cells demand food, right? When you're hungry, that's physical, totally. Then you eat, now your cells are satiated, and you can make yourself hungry again by thinking of a pizza. I'm not sure if that's the best example, but it's a really simple, you know, it's a really simple thing.
I mean, like we all, like you just said, we all know, we can all think of examples from our everyday experience where it's like our experiences are obviously factoring into the causal chain of what's going on. Like,
Right.
you know, you do something because it feels good. You avoid something because it feels bad. You know, like your thoughts and experiences clearly do play a role in the causal chain. You know, but so William James made this argument a long time ago, and there's this philosopher of mind named Hedda Hasselmerk, who wrote this really good paper called The Evolutionary Argument for Phenomenal Powers. And here, let me just quote from her paper. She's kind of summarizing James's evolutionary argument against epiphenomenalism. Okay, so this is quoting from Merck. Why is pain correlated with stimuli detrimental to survival and reproduction, such as suffocation, hunger, and burning? And why is pleasure correlated with stimuli beneficial to survival and reproduction, such as eating and breathing? According to the argument, the fact that we have these particular correlations and not other ones must have an evolutionary explanation, but given epiphenomenalism, differences in phenomenal properties could not cause differences in fitness. So natural selection would not be expected to favor these correlations over any other ones. Epiphenomenalism thus renders these correlations an inexplicable coincidence and should therefore be rejected. End quote. So her point is that if epiphenomenalism is true, then phenomenal properties, like your experiences, could not cause differences in fitness. So natural selection would not have any way to create these correlations that we observe, which, you know, I mean, everyone knows that, like, you know, adaptive behavior, like eating or mating or, you know, avoiding maladaptive behavior, like, you know, getting burnt or starving, like pleasure and pain are correlated with adaptive behavior and maladaptive behavior. You know, so it's like things that are beneficial to survival and reproduction feel good, generally speaking.
Right.
And the opposite is also true. So the thing is, on epiphenomenalism, that's all just a big coincidence. Because
right. It doesn't make any sense. They're just that they're not related. It's just like a phenomena isolated from another phenomena.
Yeah. Like like we would ordinarily think like, well, clearly like evolution has sort of taken advantage of these experiences that I have and kind of molded them so that I behave in an adaptive way. So it's like, look, it's pleasurable to eat, you know, so I eat, like that's my motivation for eating, you know, and it's like, you know, if it wasn't pleasurable to eat, then people would be passed out on the sidewalk and ambulances would have to drive up and stuff sandwiches down people's throat. But like
right.
it's pleasurable to eat. So, you know, there are all kinds of other examples you can think of, you know, things that are harmful that are unpleasant. So that's easy to explain if you're not an epiphenomenalist, because it's like, yeah, those are sort of the incentives to get you to behave in the way you need to behave. So it, you know, it has an influence over fitness. But on epiphenomenalism, these experiences we have don't cause any differences in fitness. So it's like, again, these correlations are just a total coincidence. And, that's obviously absurd.
Right. Totally. Okay, so take us to panpsychism and how it solves. What is it, first off, and how does it solve?
So panpsychism is just a view that says that phenomenal consciousness or experience is fundamental. It's sort of like an ontological primitive, like materialists already do that with, physical stuff. And panpsychists basically just, modify that conception slightly. It's not really as radical of a departure from physicalism as it may sound at first. Like there are panpsychists like Galen Strawson who argue that like panpsychism and physicalism are totally compatible. And I think there's something to that. But the thing is, like, you're sort of defining things in this really weird way, and then people can't tell what you're talking about because it's like, no, I'm a physicalist. I'm a panpsychist physicalist.
Right.
Like, yeah. So it's like what he says makes sense. Like if
it's like I'm a Christian, I'm an atheist Christian. What are you talking about?
Well,
no, I'm an atheist Christian, and then maybe it makes sense if you explain it. But meantime, you've lost half the people. They're like, what on earth?
Yeah, exactly. Like you can define things in such a way that you could be an atheist Christian, and you could define things in such a way that you could be a panpsychist physicalist. But you have explaining to do.
Right. Exactly.
So so panpsychism just takes experience to be sort of this primitive feature of the world. It's really not susceptible to further explanation. It's just sort of there at the bottom.
What does primitive mean exactly the way you're using it? Because I've noticed you use that word differently than.
I just mean that it's like not reducible. Like,
it means something more specific than just. Okay, so it's another way of saying irreducible.
Yeah, well, it's irreducible, but it's like basic. It's like basic to the world, just like how theists take God to be basic, and like materialists take matter to be basic, or the physical to be like. If you say like, well, why is the physical there? It's like it's just sort of, they could say it's a brute fact, they could say it's a metaphysical necessity, but the point is, it's like this is where explanation ends.
Right. Got it.
So
okay.
Yeah. So I don't think consciousness came from something. Like just how like physicalists will explain physical reality, like complex physical systems in terms of simpler physical systems. They start out with more basic physical stuff, and then it just you get that picture of weak emergence. Panpsychists take like basic simple forms of consciousness and kind of go up that same scale. But the view is sort of for me, it's a dual aspect view. So it's like there's only one stuff, which is experience, but it looks like one thing from the outside and it looks like another thing from inside, so to speak. Like Thomas Nagel has this nice quote from Mind and Cosmos where he says, we are examples of something that is subjectively mental from inside and objectively physical from outside, and perhaps the basis for this identity pervades the universe. So that's sort of what panpsychists think. We think that like there's this one concretely existing stuff, and that it sort of is like something to be that stuff. It's like something to be a brain, and it's another thing to be a physical system observing another physical system. So it's one thing to be this biological system, physical system, whatever. It's another thing to be that system looking at some other stuff, if that makes sense.
I think that makes sense. John, does that make sense? Is he there?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry. Yeah, it makes sense to me. Of course, I have been listening to some of this stuff more than others, I'm sure. So.
Yeah, it's just sort of like an ontological monism. It's ontological monism and epistemological dualism, where it's like there's only one stuff, but it's sort of a question of access, whether you're experiencing the world as matter or as mind. So, like just how, well, to come back to that point about consciousness being unobservable, right? It's
right.
Like we know that experience is real. And from a first person perspective, you're having this experience. And then from my perspective, though, I don't see your experience. I see brain activity. I see like electrochemical brain activity. So panpsychists sort of think there's this identity relationship there where it's like, what is the intrinsic nature of matter is experience. And then there's something that it looks like from the outside, which is like electrochemical brain activity. And then what it's like to be that brain is experience. Like that's the first person experience. So it's like two sides of the same coin rather than these two different properties or substances that are like interacting with each other.
So would that mean that like the human brain is just what the substance of that human person looks like from the outside, or I guess for anything that exists, even like maybe an atom or an electron, what it looks like to us is just the sort of a perspective that could be taken, but from the inside it has some sort of subjectivity to it.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I agree with Schopenhauer here. Like I like the way he puts it too, where he frames it in terms of will and representation. So he has the same sort of dual aspect view where it's like an ontological monism and epistemological dualism, where it's like there's this one thing, will, that's what the world is in itself, but we represent the will as, like matter or whatever. So there's will and representation. There's what the thing is in itself, and then we represent the thing is in itself, as however we represent it. And in our case, electrochemical brain activity. But there's that distinction though between what something just is in and of itself or its intrinsic nature, and then how we represent that thing, whether it's in like scientific models or if it's in just literally our observations. But I think that this makes sense of the fact that consciousness is unobservable. It makes sense of this whole relationship between the objective and subjective, because, these things seem like you can't really reduce one to the other. So just kind of sticking them together and making them two sides of the same coin kind of makes sense to me.
Let me see if I got this correctly. So I think we both agree that there's your brain chemistry and your brain patterns, and you can observe that. And then there's the thing that you are experiencing, which is not observable, but we're all three of us agree that is real to some degree. That's what you're saying, right? It's really happening, but it is unobservable according to any of the material world. It's something that I'll come out of my brain state and tell you I was feeling like a fish and me, but there's nothing that there's a reality there. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, there's the first person subjective reality and what that looks like from the outside. As Schopenhauer would say, the will objectified. That is what the objective is. It's just our representation of the subjective.
Right. So maybe like as an analogy, just thinking of a cylinder, like from looking at a cylinder from the top perspective, let's say that's the objectivity of will represented. It looks exactly circular, like it just looks like a pure circle. But if I was to change my shift over to the other side and look at the cylinder from a different angle, it would be a completely sort of square shape, supposing I don't have depth perception. And so if I'm like looking at it from that other side, I'm not going to be able to like reduce the circle shape into a square shape, because squares and circles are diametrically opposed to one another. But the neutral monist is just suggesting that no, both the circle and the square are parts of the same substance, which is the cylinder itself. Would that be like a decent analogy?
Sure. Yeah, it's like
that's a decent analogy, actually.
Yeah, you're either the system itself, you're either a bit of mind stuff yourself, or you're a system looking at another system.
How's this for an analogy? You got a TV set, and we know the mechanics of the TV set. We turn on what's playing on the screen. If you're looking at the TV set from behind it, there is something really happening on the screen, but it is somewhat unrelated to the material substance of the TV set itself. In a sense, you are kind of a dualist in a way, but in a weird way.
That's a good analogy, actually. Donald Hoffman actually uses a similar analogy. He's sort of a panpsychist. He calls himself a conscious realist, but he uses the analogy.
Yeah, that's kind of what you are. That's what, at least what.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, the similarity is that we both think that there's sort of only consciousness. And you're right, like we are.
You're arguing there's that.
Oh, sorry, you cut out there for a sec.
Yeah, go ahead, Emerson, and explain Donald Hoffman and his view and how it matches with yours to some degree.
Yeah, well, I agree with Craig that like I am sort of a dualist just in a weird way, where it's like an epistemic dualism, like it's a question of access. Like
Right. That's
there,
how you tied it together. That's actually really, really complicated, but I think you nailed it. You're a monist in terms of what is there, brain, but you're an epistemic dualist in terms of what is being experienced. That's sort of what you said, right?
yeah, that's the dual aspect, of the dual aspect monism. Like the reason there appears to be this other thing, matter, which I think is real. It's just I think the intrinsic nature of matter is experiential, just in the same exact way that I think the intrinsic nature of your brain is experiential.
So, okay, well, maybe this will be a bad question, but when we look at a human's brain, we see that it's composed of all these different atoms and things like that. It seems like the panpsychist is going to have to say that each of those atoms, when we look at that brain, are each individually conscious themselves, or at least experiential to some degree. But when I'm being what it's like to be a human, I experience reality from a very simple point of view. Like it seems to me like I'm perceiving things from a very unique individual point of view rather than like a collection of different conscious entities. How would sort of the panpsychist sort of like understand what the brain is as a composite object versus what the self is as a non-composite object?
So you've actually just touched on one of the only two good objections to panpsychism. And so this one that we're talking about now is called the combination problem, where, sort of we have these like individual conscious subjects, on the more like fundamental level, but somehow they come together to make this unified perspective, which I'm like directly acquainted with now. I don't feel like a zillion little consciousnesses, zooming around. I feel like I have this one point of view, but it's like, how is that emergence of a self just as unintelligible as the emergence of consciousness for the physicalist, right? So it's like, oh, now I've got my own hard problem because I've got the emergence of selves. So I'm stuck with this other version of this explanatory gap. And the reason this is not as hard as the hard problem is, for one, because we have the same concepts on either side of the divide. We're going from the subjective to the subjective, not from the objective to the subjective. Secondly, we have not been working on this problem for that long, and we already have some pretty decent accounts of how, we could get this unified point of view from, from more fundamental, simpler forms of consciousness. Whereas, physicalists have been working on the hard problem in one form or another for a very long time. And like, so far, the only promising answer they've come up with is maybe we're confused about the fact that we're conscious. So, and like Patricia Churchland
Right.
basically just has like faith, like she sort of takes it. I mean, a lot of materialists just like take materialism
on
as
faith.
like
That's
an
exactly what I
axiom.
said.
They take it as like an axiom, like not like a hypothesis. They take it as like this unrevisable axiom. Like, well, of course we all know materialism is true, and it's like, because of what? And then they give the worst reasons in the world, like, like physics or something. And it's like, I don't mean to be too dismissive, but I sincerely think that physicalism has the purchase that it has in our culture because it kind of sounds like physics, even though it has nothing to do with physics. Like, I sincerely think that so many people are attracted to physicalism because it has a kind of sciencey name.
Well, it's also because they think it's what the atheist is supposed to believe. Like, I made the video about Patricia Churchland when she was on Aaron Ross. I mean, part of it was his fault. He didn't really ask her the right questions. But she basically argued for materialism, and it was by faith. She basically really literally said, one day we'll discover an enzyme, or one day we'll discover a formula that's going to reconcile all of this to material reality and show us that, it is an illusion, basically. And it was like naturalism by faith, or physicalism by faith.
Yeah, physicalism by faith. I'm a naturalist. But I mean, like, that's the thing that, kind of bothers me a lot is like, look, you don't have to tell me the details. Just give me an intelligible account of what it's going to look like, in broad strokes. That's totally fine. Just give me an intelligible story about how we get from non-experiential reality to experiential reality. and try to do it without appealing to other unrelated examples of successful reduction. Like, just tell me how I'm going to get a first-person subjective point of view from a third-person objective point of view. It just, like I said, it just seems like you can't do it. And then when you look into these, there's been some important work recently, I think, explaining why this is the case, like in Thomas Nagel's Mind and Cosmos or in Philip Goff's Galileo's Error, where they kind of explain, like, look, science was not set up to explain consciousness. Like, it was consciousness was explicitly put in brackets at the beginning of the scientific revolution. So these tools that, like, Patricia Churchland is appealing to there, of course they can't explain consciousness. Like, these tools were not designed to explain qualities or subjective first-person points of view. Like, it's just like she's just using the wrong tool. And the thing is, it's not scientists' fault. It's just science was not designed to explain consciousness.
Right. Now, how does your view differ from, like, David Chalmers, for example? You're influenced by him and you listen to him. As far as I know, he doesn't call himself a panpsychist.
No, he does. He's, like I said, his credences are like 30% panpsychism, 30% dualism.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Chalmers, I don't know how, I mean, like, the way he describes panpsychism is different from how I describe it, I think, but
right, your panpsychism is closer to something that I find actually lucid and potentially true. How panpsychism has been described is very different. That there's consciousness in everything, spoons, and you're like, what? Everything has consciousness.
I mean, that's how it's described by materialists who, can't really be bothered to learn anything about the view that they're criticizing. But I don't know of any panpsychist who thinks that, like, spoons are conscious.
Right. So how would you, if you were to summarize what panpsychism actually is in, like, a pithy phrase, a tweet, if I were to tweet out, I've become a panpsychist, what would I say?
Oh man. See, the thing is, I don't know if that's possible.
It's hard, isn't it?
Well, the only reason no one would ever wake up one day and be like, you know what makes sense? Panpsychism. Like, that would just never happen. Like, you have to be stuck with certain problems for a while. And then, it's not until you really appreciate the problems, then, you can't appreciate panpsychism as a solution until you've really wrestled with the problems and they've kind of bothered
the hard
you for
problem.
a while.
The hard problem of consciousness is a real hard problem of consciousness. And you have to, like, this is what you're saying, I think, that you had to have really thought about how insoluble that problem is to come up with panpsychism as a potential solution.
Exactly.
You have to have wrestled with it.
Because we know consciousness is real. So that means we have two options. It either emerged or it didn't. And so I opted for the didn't emerge side. If I went for the emerged side, then I would be some kind of naturalistic dualist. But I've kind of already explained why I don't like property dualism and why I don't like epiphenomenalism. I'm just not really comfortable with a totally unintelligible form of emergence. And, it seems to multiply entities unnecessarily. Like, we could just say that consciousness didn't emerge and then just kind of reimagine, because remember, those are our only two options. Once you recognize that consciousness is real and irreducible, then your options are either, okay, it didn't emerge, because it's not real, or it didn't emerge because panpsychism is true. And if you want to say that it did emerge, it had to be this form of strong emergence, which is just dualism. But if you want to remain a monist, you've got to say it didn't emerge.
The emergence, the thing that I say about the emergence is that doesn't solve the problem. It may have emerged, but so what? Because I got into a debate with someone on Twitter for like 3 days, and he was like, "It's emerged out of evolutionary process." I'm like, "Okay, maybe, but so what?" It doesn't solve the problem. It's still something that is there unaccounted for.
Yeah, I mean, the evolutionary. I mean, sometimes people. I actually also got in, like, it might have even been the same guy, an argument about, like, the evolutionary reasons, like why we evolved like this. Mental module or that. It's just like, those are interesting questions. It's just, those are not the questions that I'm talking about. Like, those are just different questions.
Yeah, and I kept saying to him, I really don't think you understand what the hard problem of consciousness is. And he kept going, what would make you think that? I'm like, because you just don't seem to. It was a 3-day tweet fest. It started because Scott Clifton said that he is not a strict physicalist. I'm pretty sure he'd be okay with aspects of what you're talking about. I don't know if you know who that is. He's like a pretty well-known atheist.
No, I mean, we're kind of like internet acquaintances. No, I like Scott a lot. I think he's really smart. I like him a lot. But no, he's not a physicalist. That's right. I think he said because consciousness is a thing when someone asked him
Yes,
why.
that's exactly what he said. And in that same series of tweets, that's when I got into a debate with the guy on Twitter.
You know, and it's funny because like that is sort of exactly my reasoning too. Like if I had to summarize, like, wait, why are you not a physicalist? Because consciousness is a thing. Like that's really it. Like physicalism can't explain phenomenal consciousness. It just can't. You have to either get rid of it, or you have to give in to strong emergence, in which case you're not really a physicalist anymore. So anyway, I take, like I said, I take the didn't emerge side of that because it strikes me as more plausible than the emerged side of that, because I don't like strong emergence. So I say that consciousness is fundamental. This leads to a lot of confusion sometimes, but like, you know, a lot of it really just is confusion. Like a lot of people who argue against panpsychism are just knocking down a straw man. They don't really realize what the view.
Well, that's what I was telling John before this started. I was like, a lot of the people don't even understand what's being talked about and don't understand what the arguments are. Clear when I watch, you know, when I go look in the chats and see what people are saying. It's like, God, you guys just don't get it. You know.
Yeah, I mean, like I don't know. It definitely hasn't made my life easier, but I guess
you're
like
persecuted. You're part of the persecuted minority. How do you think I feel?
Well, I wouldn't go so far as to say I'm persecuted, but people do just, you know, they're extremely dismissive, and it's frustrating to be condescended to by people who don't know what the hell they're talking about. And just like,
how do you think I feel every single day on Twitter? Welcome to Christianity. You should become a Christian. That's exactly what happened to us.
But the thing is, like, I feel like I got sidetracked from John's question about the combination problem. So the combination problem, the reason I don't think it's just another hard problem for us is, for one, we have the same concepts on either side of the divide. You know, we're going from the subjective to the subjective. But, you know, does it still require strong emergence? It's like, well, you know, there is emergentist panpsychism that is ultimately better than the kind of strong emergence that would require, that naturalistic dualism requires. But there are non-emergentist accounts as well. I actually had someone on my podcast who's a grad student talking about his phenomenal routing solution, which is non-emergentist, and it just kind of avoids the combination problem. And it's sort of Leibnizian, like it borrows a lot from Leibniz. So I think that's a pretty appealing non-emergentist answer. But the thing is, like, what I've always said to the combination problem when it comes up, because remember, this is like one of the two serious objections to panpsychism that exist, that I'm aware of. I always point out that, like, first of all, the combination problem is usually presented in this very outdated, like, kind of atomist way of viewing the world, where it's like there are a bunch of these little grainy bits just kind of whizzing around, and they're all little subjects, you know, each and every one of them. And somehow you stick all these marbles together, and then, you know, there's this new point of view. And it's like, well, hang on, we don't think the world is like that. Like, physics has completely, you know, destroyed that sort of ontology. Like, we don't think there's a bunch of little, you know, grains of sand that are whizzing around. Like, that's not modern particle physics. So I think when you kind of get down to like a more field-based ontology, or you know, like even like a wave function or something, it just, you know, the combination problem doesn't have the same intuitive force. Like, I'm not saying that it's solved, but when you picture a bunch of little atoms whizzing around, you know, somehow combining into one point of view, yeah, that seems like a very difficult problem. But once you kind of get more in the field ontology frame of mind, it doesn't really seem like as much of a problem. So that's the first point, you know, is just like, what is fundamental reality? Not exactly an easy question, but that's the question that you have to come up with an opinion on if you want to present the combination problem and say, like, look, this is a serious problem for panpsychism. It's like, okay, well, you've got to tell me, you know, what you think fundamental reality is like, you know, which is not exactly, you know, an easy question. And the second not so easy question that, you know, the opponent of panpsychism has to give an answer to is, what is the self? Or like, what is the subjective experience? Like, that's another whole can of worms of just like, okay, so you have the stuff that's doing the combining, that would be fundamental reality. And then you have this thing that is being combined into, which is the self. Now, like, these are contentious areas, like in philosophy and in science. Like, what is the self is not an easy question, and what is fundamental reality is not an easy question. But
Right.
you have to sort of take strong positions on both of those questions if you want to even present the combination problem. So it's not the same thing with the hard problem for physicalism. So yeah, that's kind of
that's one of the main objections. What are the other objections to your?
the other objection to panpsychism, that is actually a decent objection, is that physics doesn't really tell us that time is fundamental, as far as I know. Like, I'm definitely not a physicist, but as far as I know, time is not fundamental. Like, a lot of people think space-time is emergent. And the thing about experience is that it is essentially dynamic. You know, like, it's kind of this, you know, there's a stream of consciousness. There's like a sequence of events. So, you know, consciousness is essentially dynamic. It's not static. So if you're going to tell me that, like, it's not possible for there to be a sequence of events on the fundamental levels, then that's a problem for panpsychism, because panpsychists think that fundamental reality is experiential. But if it's experiential, then that means it's a process. You know, it's not like a static, you know, sort of object or something. Like, it's a process. It's dynamic. It's in flux. You know, like, consciousness is never quiescent. It's always in flux. But if you say that there is no time, like, in any sense, at the fundamental level, then, you know, that's a problem for panpsychism, because consciousness is essentially dynamic.
I see. Okay, so that's interesting, because especially since, like, I've heard this sort of like debate going on between A theory and B theory of time, and I just never found it like relatable or even important or really interesting at all. But this is interesting, especially if, like, you could use the fact that we're conscious, and consciousness is very much dynamic, where it's like undergoing, or you have to talk about it in sort of presentist terms or present type terms, because things are
Sequentially, yeah.
Right. That, I guess, could be, in a sense, an argument either against B theory of time, or an argument against this sort of like irreducibility of consciousness. But of course, I guess we like you were saying before, we're much more familiar with ourselves being conscious than we are about the, like, whole metaphysics of time. So if we're, like, working on what we know, most assuredly, we might want to favor an A theory of time, maybe.
Right. If it could be shown that panpsychism only works with the A theory, then yeah, that would raise my credence in the A theory for sure. But yeah, you're right. What's most certainly known is, you know, the flux of consciousness. So if we come up with a theory of reality that's incompatible with that, then that's a problem. But I'm not 100% sure that the B theory, I'm not sure where the A theory and B theory fit into this. Like, I'm not sure if what I was just describing about, okay, fundamental reality is not temporal. Like, I don't think that's the same thing as the A theory, B theory issue.
Gotcha.
But I haven't.
I don't think it is either.
All right. I just heard you talking about consciousness being dynamic, and I know that especially within A theory of time, that's, like, held as the dynamic theory of time, because things are changing.
Yeah.
But
no, you could be right. You could be right. I haven't read enough about the
I know.
philosophy.
Me neither. But it is interesting. I'm, like, making a mental note to, like, oh, this is a reason to think that this debate over A theory and B theory is actually important now.
Worth watching. I know. I tune it out all the time.
Yeah, I know.
Like, sounds interesting, guys. How much do you know about, like, quantum physics? Do you know anything in that area at all?
I have a strict rule about never talking about quantum physics, because I'm not a physicist, and I personally get annoyed when I hear people who aren't physicists talk about quantum physics, because it just seems like it's invoked for, like, endless, like, woo and stuff, and I'm just, like, to the point where, like, I feel bad, but, like, quantum physics is, like, more associated with woo at this point for me than, like, actual physics.
Well, yeah, a lot of people have latched onto it because it fits a lot of, like, not necessarily woo theories, but it fits a lot of Eastern mysticism type theories about reality. I can see why they would latch onto it. But
see, I feel this way
of stuff. And what's interesting is your handle is Walden, right? And that's from Thoreau. is there some relationship there with like the transcendentalists? Did you read
Oh,
them? Are you
I
influenced by
kind of
them?
liked him. I liked him when I was younger, I guess, like Emerson and Thoreau and stuff. Not really much of an influence on me now, but I'm sort of like a libertarian socialist, and just like the libertarian half of me kind of likes transcendentalism.
Oh, so it was like
But
Walden, like living out in the woods part that you like, not the Emerson kind of cosmic consciousness part. There's different
yeah,
aspects of both of them.
yeah, I mean, I'm honestly like the least woo person that you're gonna meet, which might sound kind of funny, but the thing is, like, I arrived at this like panpsychist conclusion by way of analytic philosophy. Like, it's not like a woo woo belief for me. It's like, trust me when I say I am the least woo person that you will ever meet.
Yeah, no, I believe you. Your panpsychism is a lot less woo based than anything I've ever heard or even thought it was going to be. Um, there's aspects of it that are probably provably true, but it's a type of dualism for sure. It's not necessarily incompatible with dualism, how at least how you framed it. What are your objections? I'm sure you watched probably some of the J.P. Moreland, Eric Hernandez. You watched the Christian dualists somewhat, right?
Yeah, yeah, a little bit. Well, I mean, they don't really have persuasive arguments in favor of their view.
And what do
Like,
you think about how they're framing it otherwise?
well, I don't think that they have like, I don't think they're defending their position very well. Like, I think what a lot of people do on both sides of this, because it's often treated like, philosophy of mind is treated often as if it's like this two-party system between like materialism and dualism. And it's like a lot of the defenses of dualism I see are sort of like, look, we know that physicalism can't work because of this and this and the other thing. And a lot of defenses of materialism I see are like, well, we know dualism doesn't work because of this and this. And it's like,
Right. Well, the problem with how they're framing the argument is they're like, we know materialism or strict physicalism doesn't work, therefore soul. And I'm like, well, there's a whole bunch of stuff in between there that
yeah,
disproves the soul. So
yeah, you could be a neutral monist, you could be an idealist. Like, you don't have to just jump straight to dualism. You can still try to just work within the tools of monism to solve these problems. But yeah, I don't find that the dualist position is necessary. Like, I feel like they're kind of multiplying entities unnecessarily. Like, we can solve this with one stuff. We don't need to like work with more tools here. um and maybe, like, I mean, the thing is, dualism is intuitive. Like, that's the main thing it has going for it, is like, look, I feel like I have this body and I feel like I have this mind, and they feel like separate things to me. And like, but other than that, so it has like this kind of intuitive pull, but I don't really,
well, you
I just
also
think it
feel
has
like
too many problems.
you're a person, a unique like entity unto yourself. That's the thing that intuitively that's how we experience the world. Like that I'm an individual human being who has his individual characteristics that are in some sense irreducible to in a different meaning than how we meant like irreducible consciousness.
Well, yeah, that's absolutely true. And like, I think that the whole conversation around persons is going to be more fruitful for dualists than the conversation around consciousness. Because I don't think dualists are sort of very good at articulating why dualism is better on consciousness, but they where their actual strength is in terms of like persons, like John was talking about. Like, I feel like this, unified point of view, like this person in the world. Um, but what was I going to say? Something about dualists. Oh yeah. Well, the thing is, so those people you mentioned are theists,
Right.
and I have a very low credence in theism. So like, if you want to, say that God imparts this soul, to a fetus or something at some point in its development, then like, you're allowed to do that because you already have a high credence in theism, like, so it's just not that weird. You already have this sort of background picture of the world where something like that can happen. But I have a high credence in naturalism. So like, I don't really have like a supernatural God who can impart a soul.
Right. So
know,
you're looking to reconcile your position to a naturalistic atheistic worldview.
Yes.
Pretty much round board when you started looking into this. And they did it from the opposite point of view. They were looking for a way to reconcile theism to some of these questions of the hard problem of consciousness.
Yeah, so like for me, if I wanted an immaterial soul, like a person or a point of view or something to like just be imparted to a fetus at some point in its development, then I would have to believe in strong emergence. And as I've already explained, I really don't like this like unintelligible strong emergence. I would like things to fit together smoothly and neatly. Um, so for me, I'm just not attracted to dualism because it multiplies entities unnecessarily. We don't need two things to get this done. We can just use one stuff. And I just don't have like a supernatural realm with a god to appeal to like impart this soul to me. So I would be stuck with strong emergence. But, you know, a lot of that comes down to my like high credence in naturalism. But, you know, there are Christian panpsychists. There are actually quite a few.
Right. I want to check that out because I don't think your position is all that irreconcilable with certain theological. I really don't. As far as I understood it, it's not. You could probably, you know, you might have to do a little song and dance here and there, but there's a lot of stuff that you say that makes sense to me, and I don't think it's that. It's
Yeah,
that
there's
far.
I was going to say the two people to look into would be Eugen Nagasawa, who is a famous panpsychist, and he's a Christian. He was an atheist, and then he started reading into the ontological argument, and then he became a theist, which means he's probably the only person in the world to become a theist because of the ontological argument.
Right, exactly. That just makes sense to me.
But he became one, so he's a theist and he's a panpsychist. And Godhard Bruntrop, who's like a German theologian, he's written a lot. He's actually an emergentist panpsychist. He's written a lot of great stuff on the topic. But yeah, he's a German theologian and panpsychist. He's one to look out for.
And just on YouTube, there's a famous new channel, Elephant Philosophy. He said that his favored sort of theory of mind is panpsychism. Some sort.
Oh yeah, his channel's great. Actually, you would like his channel.
Oh yeah, I'm familiar.
Really,
no, he's great. Yeah, I like his channel a lot. I actually watched that video. I totally forgot that I watched that video actually. But yeah, Elephant Philosophy is great. I wasn't aware that he was a pan-proto-psychist based on that. I mean, it's been a while since I've seen that video. But no, that's cool. And
right.
He loves Schopenhauer.
Yeah. So, yeah, I recall in his conversation with Maverick Christian, he had brought that up because Maverick Christian has sort of an argument from the irreducibility of normative oughts, like you ought to do things. And he was thinking that maybe his pan-proto-psychism could be a way out of that without having to postulate God. I think he's like a proto-panpsychist, I guess, for non-religious reasons, just for like problem of consciousness sort of reasons.
Yeah, and I actually like what he's saying there, where it's like, yeah, I do think you can. I mean, the thing is, panpsychism helps with more than just phenomenal consciousness, but that stuff is just sort of like along for the ride. Like, yeah, I do think it helps with morality a lot, like in that way, and I think it helps with causation a lot. But like I said, those things are like really nice benefits, but they're not really why I'm a panpsychist.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. You had like made a small point against dualism, and I see this a lot. A lot of people are arguing against dualism, or more often they're like arguing for physicalism or something like that, due to the causal closure principle, where it just doesn't seem to make sense to say that you have two different substances and both of them are the sufficient conditions for some event to take place. And so that's like why a lot of people will argue for a sort of monistic theory, usually a physicalism, but as against a sort of causal theory. Can you sort of elaborate what the causal closure principle is and why that might be relevant to the theory of consciousness?
No, I think you summarized it well. The concern is that if you accept mental causation, and if you're a dualist, so, you know, this is why a lot of people run to epiphenomenalism. So if you accept mental causation and you're a dualist, you're going to end up with, oh, hey, am I muted?
No, I can still hear you.
Okay, cool. Sorry, never mind. Okay, so yeah, so you're not just going to end up with overdetermination, because like overdetermination happens all the time in the world. Like you end up with more than one sufficient cause for something happening. You know, like you might win an election by like many votes, and it's like or you know, like I might like stab you and shoot you or something. Like, so the cause of your death was overdetermined. So overdetermination itself is not really a problem. The problem is this like systematic overdetermination where like literally every event that goes on in the brain has a sufficient physical cause and a sufficient mental cause. And it's like there's just this highly orchestrated, like, you know, just overdetermined just mess where it's like it strikes many philosophers as like, you know, profligate and just implausible. And you know, I kind of see that where it's like, why would you want this systematic overdetermination? Like, it just seems like if you're going to have 2 sufficient causes of everything, then why not 3 or 4? Like, it's just like you're like I said, you're just multiplying entities unnecessarily.
So like, just to take an example, like say I place my hand on a hot stove, you could have a sort of physical description of like, oh, the nerve endings on my fingertips, when pressed against something of a certain heat, will like send a sort of nerve charge over to my brain, and then that'll like raise up the or not hamstrings, but whatever, the muscle tendons in my arm to raise that up. And then you can also have a sort of mental causation sort of explanation of saying, oh, the impression I see of my hand pressing up against a red hot surface or a red surface will produce a feeling of pain. And then that feeling of pain will induce some sort of like intention to raise an arm or something like that. Is that like an example of like a sort of causal overdetermination where both explanations are perfectly sufficient to explain the result of me raising my hand, but it seems like one of them is unnecessary to the two?
Yeah, it's just like you've got these brain events and these electrochemical events that like can fully explain, you know, like, because I can look at you from the outside and just like and explain like what is happening and why. But then there's this like other thing that also explains, and it kind of seems absurd to exclude it, right? Like, you know, your experience of pain. And it's like, of course that should be in the story of like, you know, why you're recoiling from this stimuli. But the way that I would make sense of this is just say like, look, that electrochemical activity, like in a sense, that is all there is. It's just from the inside, electrochemical activity feels like something. So it's like there, you know, I'm not multiplying entities unnecessarily here. I've just got one thing. It's just the brain and you know, the chemicals and the electricity and the skin and the tendons. Like that's all there is. But this is where like the dual aspects come in. Like this is like the Schopenhauer view where it's like you are the thing in itself. And then when I, as a thing in itself, am observing you, then I represent will or experience or whatever as, you know, tendons and electrochemical brain activity and so forth. But it's like 2 sides of the same coin. You've got experience, you know, first person from the inside, and what that looks like from the outside to an observer is, you know, matter.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. There is the, I guess, perennial question regarding panpsychism that like whenever anybody talks about panpsychism, there's going to be this sort of like objection, like, oh, that's a theory where like rocks are conscious, right? And like everything's conscious. Can you sort of elaborate why, and like you had mentioned it earlier about how like with spoons, why, can you maybe explain why people might get that impression from panpsychism, and then why maybe you're not committed to the position that like anything that might exist, like a spoon or a rock, are conscious? Because I think for a lot of people, they just immediately think that, yeah, if panpsychism is true, then rocks are conscious.
Right. So I don't think rocks are conscious. I don't know of any panpsychist who does. But I think there are 2 reasons why people get that impression. The first is just the etymology, which is just pan meaning all and psyche meaning soul. So it's like literally everything. Everything is conscious. And like that is not correct. Like that's not the view. The view is not that everything is conscious. Sometimes like, you know, panpsychists will be a little careless and they'll just kind of throw that out there. But like I wish they would stop doing that because, you know, it's not true. Like it's not accurate. And so yeah, it's the etymology, but it's also just, you know, we think fundamental reality is conscious. So it's just like, or is consciousness. So, you know, why wouldn't every clumping together be? And it's like, well, look, we do think that experience is fundamental, but that doesn't commit us to the view that just like anything that we have like a word for is going to be a subjective experience. Like, it's actually pretty silly when you say it like that. It's like, oh, right, just because like I identify it in my mind as an object, why would that mean that like the laws of nature are going to create a subject there? You know, like I have this pen on my desk, and it's like, you know, as far as the universe is concerned, that's just a collection of matter. And like what I'm saying is that there's a reason that I'm a point of view and that other things are not. You know, I mean, like, first of all, I was created by this process of evolution. So there are differences between, like, you know, I'm just saying there are prima facie differences between like manufactured things and things that came about via evolution. But the point is that just like, you know, like if you take any like composite object that just kind of doesn't make any sense, like my webcam and my microphone and my lamp and my pen, and just say like, okay, that's an object now. Well, panpsychism does not imply that that's a subject of experience. Like, and there have been really precise attempts to answer why subjects emerge here and not there, so to speak, like integrated information theory, which actually just the other day I saw something that was kind of funny because someone was like, yeah, I don't like panpsychism because it makes all these like unverifiable claims and it's just like too metaphysical and like, and then they're like, but I do like integrated information theory. And I was like, oh man.
That's funny.
Yeah, because IIT implies panpsychism.
Right. Yeah, I've heard that, or at least this sort of pan-protopsychism. I think I've heard it said that there's a potential for any physical object to be conscious if it's like integrated in some particular way in which it can like share information back and forth between itself. Like even a photodiode can be
just the greatest level of integrated information. You know, maximal phi. Like that's where experience emerges. And the thing is, like, there is a non-zero level of phi, like even at the fundamental levels.
I see. Okay. Wow. Yeah. Okay. So just to maybe, I guess, make an analogy from the point that you were making, like for the dualist, or basically for anybody that believes that human beings are conscious, like you might hold to the position that yes, all human beings are conscious, but that doesn't mean that like when you have a group of human beings, then there is some like larger human being that is conscious from each of those particular human beings' perspectives. Like if I have a support group and there's like 10 people there, I'm not going to say, no, there's actually 11 people there because those 10 people form together into like one larger consciousness or something like that. You could, like, from your position, you don't have to say that, no, like a spoon, that's a composite object out of consciousnesses, but it's not itself conscious. Is that kind of like the position that you'd be held to?
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's like a football team wouldn't be conscious.
Right.
Their support group wouldn't be conscious. Like they're aggregates of conscious subjects. So it's like the way that Leibniz would put it is like you either have an aggregation or you have a true unity. So it's like it's either a subject or it's a group of subjects.
Gotcha. Okay. And so there is a difference or a distinction, I guess, to be made then between a subject of consciousness and, I guess, consciousness at its most primitive form.
You know, I guess that depends on your view of fundamental reality. I don't really know, but no, I do think, I think that there are subjects that emerge at levels below us, but like Tononi would say that the guy who came up with IIT would say that, like, you know, a system becomes a sort of locus of consciousness as soon as it becomes more integrated. And he has a very specific, you know, definition of what integration means and what information means. He says as soon as there's more integrated information at the level of this system than at any of its parts, then that's when you get a new subject. So it's like you're more integrated than any of your parts. You know? So it's like, like you've got the system and then you've got the parts of the system, and the system itself is usually a part of an even bigger system. You know, just like, you know, you're made of all these, you know, these cells and stuff, which are systems in their own right. And, you know, you're also a part of an ecosystem. So it's like, you know, you're a part of a bigger system and you are a system with parts. So the question is, you know, why does consciousness emerge here and not there? And, you know, this is a problem for everybody. And this is like one of the reasons why I am attracted to panpsychism, because they're some of the only people who are actually even addressing this problem. But even if you're a physicalist, you have to answer this question, which is basically just why here and not there? Like, why do we have consciousness at the level of organisms rather than the level of cells, or rather than the level of like ecosystems or towns or something? Like, because just at face value, it's not really obvious. Like, like, why am I the subject of experience instead of some things that are my parts? Like, or why has consciousness not emerged at an even higher level?
Right.
Like, you just kind of put this pin somewhere in the scale of emergence, and you say, here's where the subject of experience is going to emerge. And I'm saying that's a question that everyone has to come up with some kind of an answer to, of
Right.
why did it emerge here instead of there? And I'm saying, like, Tononi actually has an answer where he's like, well, it's where there's maximal phi, maximally integrated information. So whenever the system has a higher level of integrated information than any of its parts, or of the system of which it itself is a part, then that's why consciousness emerges there.
Okay, yeah, interesting. And it's not that sort of like strong form of an emergence that you were objecting to either. It's because, like, at least at the base level of reality, there is still consciousness there, that which, like, you can sort of build together some sort of like integrated system of consciousness that is maybe more self-aware, but it's not like now self-aware. It's just coming in gradations, I guess, rather than in like whole, like, completely different objects or things.
Well, I mean, you could accept something like IIT and be an emergentist panpsychist and think that like the self is emergent, or you could take a different route like I try to take. But as far as I know, they're both available to someone who accepts IIT.
Cool. Okay. Sorry, Craig.
John, there any questions?
I don't know. We can ask anybody in the chat. Okay, we got a question from Salem.
Hang on. Can you wait 1 second? I need to grab a water. My throat is killing me.
Sure. We got a Doug Pine Creek was in the chat. He was saying, "Is this really John Buck speaking? His voice sounds different." That's because on stream it's only showing John Buck, just because I think right now the live stream is like locked onto the account that I started it with. So sorry about that. But no, we've got Emerson.
This is the three voices of John Buck.
yeah. That's how we.
This is John Buck going insane in a really interesting way, where he's having like a three-way conversation with himself, acting out different parts.
Nice. Yeah. We got several people in the chat. We got Salem, we got SJ, we got John 1135, and we got Doug Pine Creek. We had Spartan in as well. So thanks everybody for joining in. This has been a really cool conversation, Craig.
Yeah, this is great. It's very hard to manage when it keeps cutting out, but it still was. You know your stuff. You've actually thoroughly.
Poor Craig.
Investigated this, from what I can.
Yeah, Emerson actually stepped off to grab some water. So.
Oh, are we still on air? We're still on air, right?
Yeah, we're still on air. I think
I'm back.
Okay, cool. Craig was just complimenting you, so you missed it.
Oh, I'll have to watch it later. If he said something mean, it's not true.
No, it is true. Your TikToks are nowhere close to layman TikToks or Spartan's TikToks. Spartan TikToks are like, those are badass, man. Those are great. Yours are like, they're decent. You'll get there. Just keep banging. Pine Creek. Is Pine Creek actually in the audience? You got to get on TikTok. We want to see TikToks, Pine Creek. To everybody's on there. Who's anybody? Shannon's on there. Apologia, myself, Spartan, Emerson.
Yeah, like I said, I have dozens of followers on TikTok.
Yeah, but they really care about your work. It's not how many there are. It's like, how much you're impacting them with your TikToks. It's how much value they're getting out of their following you.
That's a good point. I am changing lives on TikTok. So
no, I said you're really well versed in the stuff that we've talked about, panpsychism. You seem to really thoroughly know it. It seems to me like you've actually studied it for a period of time. Is that true?
Maybe like a year and a half, 2 years. Yeah, like 2 years.
Right, because you seem pretty thorough on the stuff I was asking you. That's kind of what I was hoping.
I hope what I'm saying is coherent. I hope I don't look like I'm at like a bulletin board with red string or something.
No, you may have even converted me to a form of I'm going to check out the Christian panpsychists, because there's some things that you were saying that I absolutely think is somewhat spot on. And then other stuff, you know, John and I were talking about when you weren't here.
Yeah,
Well,
Craig raised a brilliant objection to panpsychism, but you missed it, so you'll have to like listen back to it later.
Okay.
Is there any audience questions for me?
Yeah. What were you gonna say, Emerson?
Oh, I was just gonna make a couple recommendations for. I would say like Schopenhauer is he's really easy to read, and he's just really profound. He's, you know, an idealist and a panpsychist. Galen Strawson is really good on this. And of course, you can check out my podcast, Walden Pod, where I talk about this pretty frequently. So if anyone is for some reason wants to hear more about this, they can check that out.
There's also, like, as for another like Christian philosopher that, I don't know, there's some of his stuff sounds pretty panpsychist, like Leibniz, who like made his famous theodicy in like contemporary to Newton. He has this book Monadology, which is all about how the basic constructions of reality are like formed, like all there are the monads, and monads can like work together and like make other things. But he talks about how the monads are all some semblance of consciousness to them. And it's an interesting, it's hard to say if it's exactly like panpsychist or like a dualist, or like if it's maybe...
He's a famous panpsychist.
Okay, yeah. Because, we had talked about this a little bit before, Emerson, how there's sometimes some confusion between whether somebody was a panpsychist or were they an idealist. And I know there's a lot of sort of overlap between the two, especially since like the idealists and the panpsychists will agree that yes, like consciousness is fundamental. Everything is basically consciousness. And then
right, but that's how this is reconcilable with the Christian position. I mean, all Christians are of a sense an idealist in a certain way, because we believe that, you know, God has created everything.
Right.
And so we could all be considered idealists, and this is not incompatible with idealism, at least as I understood the stuff he was saying. I'm sure there's a way to fudge it so that it all works together. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, like most people associate idealism with Bishop Berkeley's idealism, and that is kind of like a radical form of idealism that is distinct from the way that word has been used by others in the past. Like, so Berkeley thinks that there's like literally nothing but your experience of, you know, the table in front of you. Like you can experience it in all these different ways, and you strip away those qualitative experiences and there's literally nothing left. So like the difference is, okay, so like an idealist like Schopenhauer, on the other hand, like he says that like there is a mind independent reality, in the sense that there's a reality that's independent of your mind, you know, but there's not a reality that's independent of the category of mind. So it's like you have your representation of what the thing is in itself, but it's just a representation. Whereas Berkeley would say that like the representation is all there is. So like people think that idealism, they associate it with him, but the thing is, like, there are less radical forms of idealism, you know, like transcendental idealism, where you just have a representation or an idea of what the thing is in itself, but you don't actually have access to it. You know, it's noumena, like you don't know what it is in itself. So yeah, that form of idealism is compatible with panpsychism, as long as you take the Schopenhauer route and say like, well, wait, we actually do have access to something beyond representation in our own case.
Mm-hmm.
Did you watch, just out of curiosity, there was a debate between Keith Ward and Daniel Dennett?
Yeah, that was a long time ago. I don't really remember it very well.
Okay, just curious. Because Daniel Dennett was, as far as I know, that's the leading consciousness and illusion guy. Is there somebody else that I don't know about?
Keith Frankish is probably up there too.
Yeah, I'm not even sure who that is.
All right. We got...
So, any other questions, Johnny?
Yeah. There's a question from John 1135. Any thoughts on hylomorphism? I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's like Aristotle's sort of theory of consciousness that he had.
Yeah, I'm not terribly familiar with Aristotelian anything. Like I'm just not a fan of like scholastic like metaphysics. I don't like them. Like it just seems like I just don't get it. I don't get the utility of it. I like read it and I just want to die. Like it's just like I don't know anything about it. Like, and I don't really care to, honestly. I had someone once try to explain hylomorphism to me for
Because
over
you're an
an
atheist, dude. So because you want to sin, so you start reading stuff, and then you're like, I could read this, or I could go sin. I could go drink booze and be with girls. What am I gonna do?
Yeah, I gotta say, drinking booze and being with girls beats reading Aristotle 10 times out of 10.
Reading about it, reading Aristotle. Told you just want to sin.
But I once had someone try to explain hylomorphism to me for over an hour, and I still don't get it. As far I don't understand it. So I
Dry
can't
Apologist
really
explained it pretty good on my channel, actually. Didn't he explain it pretty well one day? John, do you remember that?
I don't know. I kind of, I'll throw Caleb under the bus here, and I think that the only real reason he's a hylomorphist is because he finds like some dualism in regards to consciousness correct. Like he doesn't find physicalism plausible at all, but he also still wants to sort of retain a sort of things actually exist, and there's no like extra spooky stuff that's going on with like souls that can maybe be disentangled from bodies and different things like that. I think that's sort of why he's a hylomorphist.
Oh, you wrecked him, dude. Dude, we set up a debate between you and him. You wrecked him, but he'll come back, man. Watch out, because he'll be vengeful on that. I just think he explained it well, if I remember correctly, on my channel, because I had never heard the term before.
Yeah, it's
I could be
something
wrong.
like there's the form and the matter, and like persons are composed out of form and matter, and the form is the soul or the consciousness, and then that consciousness has control over the matter, and it's part of the same thing. So like probably if you were to like cut off somebody's arm and then like reattach somebody else's arm, like that would be integrated to the form of the soul of the person, maybe, or maybe not arms, that might be too complicated, but like a liver or something like that. And then that's now part of the person, because the person, that's like integrated together or something like that. I don't know. That's the thing. It's like trying to understand Aristotelian like metaphysics, and it's the year 2021, and so it's kind of a weird thing to take up as a hobby.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm saying. I'm like, we've developed, like, society has progressed past the need for hylomorphism. We don't need to try to decipher like this. Like we have new tools. We have like new conceptual tools that, like, you know, these that our ancestors didn't have. Like we've made progress. We should use these new things, you know, because they're useful, you know. Yeah.
All right. We got a question from Salem. What epistemic probability would you put the existence of an orthodoxly conceived monotheistic God? So just basic monotheism, I guess.
Probably like less than 10%.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I don't know how much more time you have. I know I sort of like talked about this conversation as being two parts, talking about consciousness and panpsychism, and the other part maybe talking about counter apologetics. And we didn't really get too much into that. I don't know how much time both of you guys have. Would if Emerson would like to?
I can explain why my credence is so low in like a kind of overview way, if you want.
Yeah,
definitely come back. I want
to. What were you saying, Craig? You're cutting out.
Oh, did I cut out? I want to have him come back. I'm going to look into some of the Christian panpsychists, and then we'll destroy him, you know, as we usually do.
All right. Why don't you sort of lay out your basic reasons for having it so low, and then maybe we'll get you back on to maybe talk about some of the more in-depth arguments for atheism.
Well, as I outlined in my TikTok, I gave 5 reasons why I'm an atheist, which is just...
As I outlined in my TikTok. It even sounds awesome. As I outlined in my TikTok, the five main points of atheism. It's so awesome. TikTok is awesome, man.
I want to throw myself in front of a bus after starting a sentence with, as I outlined in my TikTok, comma.
My TikTok symposium. You got to call it your TikTok.
So
My,
as
my
I
TikTok
explained,
lecture.
in my 60-second TikTok lecture, I explained that I have these sort of like 5 big picture reasons why I'm an atheist. The first is just that we don't need a God to explain anything. So it's not really a question of like whether atheists or theists can account for the evidence. Like I think that we're both capable of accounting for the evidence and explaining the data. So there's nothing that we can point to and say a God is absolutely necessary to explain that. Like there's just no possible way you could explain this without God. And like likewise, there's no suffering that's so appalling that a Christian couldn't conjure up an explanation for why an all good and all powerful God would continue to behave in a way that's totally indistinguishable from non-existence. So I don't think that these like logical deductive arguments can really like settle the matter. You know, the same goes for like divine hiddenness and biblical confusion. So anyway, I try to make like an inductive case because I think that we're both capable of explaining the evidence. But still, point one is we don't need a God to explain anything. The second and third point are just kind of like mirror images of each other. It's just there are very few, if any, natural phenomena that are better explained by theism than by naturalism. And there are many phenomena, you know, many lines of evidence that are better explained by naturalism than by theism. So this is where I would make those arguments from like gratuitous suffering or divine hiddenness or biblical confusion or religious confusion or evolution or biblical errors and contradictions. You know, the biological roles of pain and pleasure, the limited spread of Christianity, animal suffering. Like these are all things that I think we would not expect to find in a world where Christianity is true. Again, it's not that Christianity is incompatible with all these things. It's just that like it's surprising, you know, whereas on naturalism, it's not surprising. It's completely expected. So, you know, we have to ask like if theism were true, what would I expect the world to look like? You know, and an omnipotent God has, you know, a lot of options. And just the natural world doesn't look like I would expect it to look if God were behind it all. So yeah, the world looks basically what I would expect it to look like if God didn't exist. You know, for the reasons that I've outlined. Like I think that you know the evidence that I've kind of touched on, there's obviously a lot more to talk about. Is just not surprising on naturalism, and it's pretty surprising on theism. The fourth reason is just that theism is more metaphysically profligate as an explanation than naturalism. Seems pretty obvious. It's just like, you know, naturalists don't believe in anything over and above the things that supernaturalists believe in, like you guys, like we both believe in the natural world, but you guys add stuff to it, and it's like it's a more complicated explanation. It's more metaphysically profligate. You're positing more ontological entities. So naturalism is kind of like the lighter theory, and you know we can explain all the evidence, and I think that we can do a better job explaining the evidence, but we also do so with fewer metaphysical tools. So it's a simpler theory, it's a better explanation of the evidence. And the last reason is just that theism suffers from these internal problems. It's not that I think that like all versions of God are like incoherent or anything, but I think that many versions of God are like internally inconsistent. Like I think that, you know, many notions of, you know, the traditional God do involve these internal contradictions, and you know we have to rule out all kinds of you know versions of God because many versions of God are totally incoherent. Plus I think there are you know, because I'm saying reason number 5 is that there are these internal problems. So I think that something like libertarian free will doesn't make any sense. Special creation, you know, it's just Christianity makes use of these concepts, you know, like libertarian free will or immaterial souls or special creation or the inerrancy of the Bible, whether it's like scientific or historic or moral inerrancy. And like these concepts are deeply problematic. So like any sort of worldview that incorporates them, I think inherits all those difficulties. So just to sum up, we don't need a God to explain anything. There are very few phenomena that are better explained by theism than by naturalism. there are many phenomena that are better explained by naturalism than by theism. Theism is more metaphysically profligate than naturalism as an explanation, and theism suffers from these internal problems. So if you were to ask why I'm an atheist, those are sort of the 5 reasons. And for the, I think that puts my credence in atheism at about 0.9.
I like it. Man, like some of the atheists we talk to, they'll just be like, well, I prayed once and I didn't get any answers, so now I'm an atheist. You actually have your whole like data points and lists all set up and everything. I like it.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. That's why I've just kind of had it there. But it's like,
do you do debates?
Yeah, a lot of. Not really. I'd be happy to, but no one wants to debate me.
No
one's
John
ever
will debate you, but you'll kill him. John, debate him.
No, I feel like actually I was just invited to a debate. I was invited to debate the problem of evil on adherent apologetics sometime soon.
That should be good. That would be really good. He might come by and check this out. Problem of evil. You should try apologists.
It drives me insane though when atheists are just like, oh, I don't have to. It's just a lack of belief. I don't have to make a case, and it's like, just make your case. Like this is a thing you think. Just make the case for it. Don't like back away. Just try. I almost just want to be like, look, just be a man. Like you have this thing that you're saying you think, and then people are asking you for reasons, and then you just run away from it. And you're like, I don't have to. It's a lack of belief. So that drives me crazy. So yeah,
right. Well, they do that on purpose. On purpose so that you don't have to really publicly defend. You can publicly defend your lack of belief rather than the ontology, the proposition God does not exist, because it's a lot easier to rationally justify. That's not necessarily why they think they're doing it, but that's one of the side benefits of being a lack of belief atheist, is that if I'm in a debate with a theist and I'm a lack of belief atheist, I never have to defend the proposition God does not exist or prove it or even offer evidence. All I have to do is rationally justify my lack of belief, which is really easy to do. I just have to not believe you. I can just keep skepticing. You can say, well, here's this argument, and I can just keep.
Yeah. You can. I mean, like they're just trying. I think what they think they're doing is just getting rid of the burden of proof.
Right. It's as Shannon called burden of proof tennis.
I don't want to play burden of proof tennis. I'm just going to make my case.
I hear it. I like it. We should you should check out dry apologist Theodicey. Maybe we could have you come on and debate him.
Yeah, totally. No, I like Caleb. I watch his videos sometimes.
Yeah, it's good stuff. So do we have questions for him, John? Or are we not doing that?
No, we just had those, I guess, was it 2 or so? I don't know if we have any more, but we might want to wrap it up.
Yeah, we can wrap it up.
Okay.
So it was hard because this is really complex stuff, and I kept like losing a lot, but I think we still got a lot of good information, I think, right?
Yeah, definitely. Like Emerson, he was able to really explain his points really well, and I definitely recommend Craig re-listening to this because he makes a strong case for his panpsychism, definitely stronger than I've ever heard from anybody else. So.
Well, thanks. So, John, the audio is coming through on your end. The breakup was not on.
Yeah. I think it was just Craig, since I was able to hear it on YouTube, and also like you weren't ever breaking up for me. So.
Yeah, as usual, it was just me getting the short end of the stick. Everybody's hearing, everyone's having a good time, and I'm like, can't hear anything. It's sad, but it's part of the thing of being the persecuted church. It's part of what I do.
Right. I feel you. Hey, thanks for having me on, though.
You want to wrap it up and tell us who you are and what you do and where we can find you and all that stuff and what you thought of today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have I'm on Twitter at WaldenPod, and you can I have a link tree there, and you can kind of find everything. But yeah, I've got a Twitter. I've got 2 podcasts. One is Counter Apologetics, just about philosophy of religion. The other one is Walden Pod, which is mostly about like philosophy of mind. And occasionally I talk about like, politics or something. Like I had Micah Edvinson on to talk about socialism. Yeah, I mean, like check out those podcasts. They're on iTunes and Spotify. I also upload podcasts to YouTube just Emerson Green. But yeah, if you think I did not make my case very well and you're listening, then I would just say we didn't really we just scratched the surface. Like there's so much more to talk about. I did not get into. I mean, we talked about one argument for panpsychism among like a dozen that we could talk about, and it's just a really interesting field. And even if you're not a panpsychist, I think philosophy of mind is really interesting, and I would recommend reading Galen Strawson, like an essay like Real Naturalism, or anything from Hedda Hassel-Merk or Philip Goff. Yeah, just see if it's interesting to you, because there's a lot in philosophy of mind, you know, like it's a pretty big discipline. Yeah, so if nothing else, I hope someone came away more interested in philosophy of mind.
It's cool. You should go on Nathan's channel and Pine Creek. Pine Creek still here? You should go on Nathan's for sure. Join his open stream.
Oh, yeah. I think I saw that the other day. I didn't realize it was literally open, like anyone can join it.
Yeah, anyone but John.
Well, he's always streaming while I'm at work, so it's like
that's yeah. You get the hint.
He's avoiding me.
Obviously,
I had to like take a lunch break just in order to debate him on morality, and then I had to like leave immediately after that. Like he's intentionally avoiding me by like living in the UK and streaming from his time.
It is true. It is true. So, John, let's wrap her up. And thank you for everyone attending. This was John. You want to say goodbye, because I'm afraid I'm going to cut out. So you can just close her out.
All right, yeah, we'll do. Thanks everybody for watching. Sorry for the background noise. I am ending the stream. Thanks again, Emerson, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, there we go. That was good.